What's up, painting friends? It's Stoof here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be recreating an old tutorial that I made several years back, and this has been one of my most popular painting tutorials. However, I did receive some negative feedback on it. I received comments like this, and comments like this, and comments like this. So thank you for leaving your feedback. I do appreciate that. And I'm here today to provide a new and improved painting tutorial for how to paint different types of pine trees using acrylic paint. So here is our finished result. We are going to be breaking it down into 4 different types of trees, and I'm going to show you the brushstroke techniques and what colors I choose in real time for each of these trees. So I try my best to make this a new and improved painting tutorial, so hopefully you agree with me. We are going to do these trees at the top for part 1, and if you stick around for part 2 next week, we're going to focus on some of the more detailed parts of these different types of trees. Without further ado, let's dive into this painting tutorial. All right, painting friends, it is time for the new and improved acrylic painting tutorial for how to paint different types of pine trees. I have an 11-inch by 14-inch canvas panel right here, so it's going to be similar to painting on a canvas. So we have our canvas panel, we have our disposable paper palette that I like to use. I'm using acrylic paint. I'm using a variety of brands. You're welcome to use whatever brand of paint works best for you. I'm using heavy-bodied acrylic paints, so these paints are a little thicker consistency and give a bit more texture than a soft-bodied acrylic paint. And these are professional grades, so they have a bit more pigment than those dollar store acrylic paint brands. So we have titanium white, burnt sienna, dark green, ultramarine blue, sap green, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow deep, burnt umber, magenta, Mars black, and permanent green light. So those are our colors. I also have a cup of water here, and we have some paintbrushes and paper towels. I'm using Viva paper towels for our paintbrushes. We're using 3 brushes like the last tutorial. In the original tutorial, we had a flat tip brush, an angled brush, and a filbert brush. I'm swapping out the filbert brush for this number 2 round tipped brush with a bushy bristle there. And I think that'll just help me get a bit more detail than I had in that last tutorial. But for our flat tip brush here, this is about a 3/8 of an inch flat tip brush, and then about a 1/2 inch, maybe slightly larger angled brush. This is a number 8 angled brush for the sizing that this brand uses. All right, now that we went through our materials, let's get started with this tutorial. All right, so we're going to start with the lodgepole pine type of tree. So your classic tall pine tree. We're going to dip the flat tip brush in the water, get the excess water off of the brush, and we're going to start with the trunk. So I'm going to take some of my burnt umber, mix it with a little bit of my ultramarine blue, and a little bit of my burnt sienna. Let's do a little bit more blue just to calm that color down a little bit there. Okay, and then we're just going to start. If we use the brush this way, we're going to get a wider line, and if we use the brush this way, we can get a nice narrow line. So I'm starting with more of the full face of the brush, and then I'm turning it at an angle a little bit here to get the trunk to get less wide, because we have a wider trunk at the base and a more narrow trunk up at the top. So now I'm just holding the brush the other direction. So instead of like this, I'm holding it like this, and that's giving me that nice thin line going all the way up to the top there. All right, and then I'm going to start to paint in a few branches coming off of the tree. So I'm just holding this brush at an angle, very lightly dabbing, and that's giving me some nice little branches. Starting from the center, working my way out. The branches are angled up and out for the most part. As the branches get farther from the top of the tree, closer to the base, we start to see more of those branches facing down and flat as the weight of these larger branches kind of change the angle of the branch. And we've got some in front of the tree trunk as well. The branches are not perfectly straight, they're kind of curvy. And they tend to get out slightly farther away from the trunk as we're getting towards the bottom of the tree. And I'm going to try my very best to not block your view. I know that was a big complaint in the last version of this tutorial that I created, and that is the main reason I'm redoing this tutorial actually. Alright, so we're going to put the flat tip brush away, and now that we got our branches sketched out, we're going to go to our round tip brush, and we're going to take some dark green with some sienna, and we're going to start with these darker colors here. We're going to get a little bit of our sap green in there as well, and get a good coverage on your brush. You don't want to have like any paint like dripping off or anything, but you don't want to have not enough paint. So that's a bit of a challenge when you're new to painting, is finding how much paint to put on the paintbrush. And there I just need to get a little bit more after putting those couple dabs on there. So we're just dabbing with this round tip brush. The more pressure you put, the thicker the brush stroke, or the thicker the paint goes on to the canvas. So if you press gently, you're going to get a couple of smaller little dabs. I'm going to cover up the trunk a bit here too. And we're basically just dabbing and getting our coverage on the canvas here. And if you are creating a full landscape scene, you're probably going to want to start by painting whatever's behind your tree first, so that you can just layer over all these little dabs of the pine cones and the pine needles and the bristles, the branches. If you didn't paint this first and you wanted to paint the background next, you'd have to try to squeeze little dots of sky color in between there. So it's easier to start with things in the background and work your way to the foreground. And that's just a general thing when you're painting a landscape. Just still taking the brush here and doing some dabs, covering up the front of the trunk in some spots, because these little bristles are going all around the tree. So some are going to be in front of the trunk and some are going to be behind the trunk. You're going to see some to the left and rights of the trunk. Just getting a bit more water on my brush so I have a little bit more control with the placement of these little pine needles. And we're just keep dabbing around, starting with the same color for the whole set of the pine needles here, and little bits on the branches. So I work with the layering method. That's my technique. And I use that same technique whether I'm doing acrylic or oil painting. And basically what I do is I start with whatever's in the background and whatever's darker in value first, and then I layer up more highlights and more detail as I work. So we're starting with these. First we started with the trunk because it's behind some of these leaves. We're pine needles. And then we're building up the detail here by adding more little branches and pine needles. And then we're going to layer some highlights over this later. So again, just doing these little dabs of paint. It's thicker in some spots towards the base. And if you are new here, and this is the first tutorial you're seeing by me, I have a YouTube channel and you're welcome to subscribe to that. I post all different kinds of painting tutorials. If you guys want to learn even more about painting different types of trees, you should watch some of my full tutorials where I paint a full landscape, and then you can see how trees are painted in different types of light, like in sunrise, sunset, midday, that kind of stuff. All right, so now we got all the shadows on there. I'm gonna just clean off my brush in the water, and I'm gonna take some of my umber, a little bit more of my ultramarine blue, a little magenta, and a little bit of black. And I'm just gonna add a little shadow to the left side of my trunk just to get it to look a little less flat. And I could take some white, a little bit of my ochre and my burnt sienna, a little more white, and I'm just going to add a little highlight now to these little bits of the trunk that we can see. And next I'm going to clean off that brush and we can start to add some highlights. So we're going to take some white, some sap green, and some ochre, maybe a little bit of magenta, and you might be thinking, not mixing magenta with green. That's an interesting thought, but it actually just kind of mutes down the vibrancy of that green, so it gives us more of like an earthy green and a little bit less of an unnatural bright green. So if this tree were to be in like direct sunlight and like it's, early spring day, bright sunshine in the morning, then there might be a different color that we're using for the highlight here. So this is just like your general tree on like a cloudy day. You can mix a little bit of that lighter green in there. And we're just putting highlights on some sections. We're not covering up every single spot that we put. And it's just helping to build a little bit of depth in the tree and make it look less flat. And as we're getting farther down, I'm going to mix a little bit more dark green in there so it just cools the green down a bit, because our shadows or our highlights are not quite as bright and vibrant at the base of the tree. All right, so in general, there's a nice little lodgepole pine type of pine tree for you there. If you want to go into more detail, you can, add more little branches sticking out and stuff like that, but we're gonna not go too crazy in the details. All right, so there's that branch, there's that tree. All right, so there's our lodgepole pine. Now let's move on to a Douglas fir or a Christmas tree type of tree. Nice full branch covered pine tree where we don't really see much of the trunk because it's totally covered in branches. So even though I just said that, we're still going to put a trunk in there. So I just mixed my dark green and my umber, and this one we're going to make a little shorter here. And I'm just going to do a line in the center just so we know where our center point is and where the trunk should be. It's not a huge deal how thick you make it or anything like that because it's going to be mostly covered up. All right, so now we're going to mix our dark green with our umber, and we're going to start just kind of going back and forth over the trunk, just so we know that's covered up, kind of all making this wider space coming out of that center part. And next I'm going to take my same little brush here and I'm going to start to get a couple little, so I'm very gently pressing here and that's giving me those nice little details at the top. Got a couple little pine needles and branches sticking out of the top, so I'm just very gently pressing. That one I pressed a little harder, as you can see, that put more paint down. And we just want to keep working, making all these little dabs, like we have little branches coming out. And you can kind of touch that spot up a little bit there. And there are going to be a couple little void spaces where you can see through a little bit, but you're never going to see through like right where the trunk is. And we're just kind of adding a branch, add some leaves coming off of the, or some pine needles coming off of the branch. Another one, add some needles. And we're just focusing on the sides right now. We're going to get some more detail for the branches on the forward facing part of the tree soon, but for now just focusing on getting these sides painted. And again, remember, if you're using more force, you're going to get a thicker line. If you're using less force, you're going to get a thinner line with your paintbrush. And this one you could also use your angled brush or a flat tip brush, but with this little brush you're definitely able to get the details on those branches towards the outer part. Just kind of angle down from each branch there. Okay, all right, I'm liking that. Now we're gonna clean off this brush and we're gonna mix some ochre with some sap green, and we'll do a little bit of ultramarine blue and some white. And I'm gonna actually add a little more white. I want it to stand out just a little more than the background. So it's definitely going to work better if your paint's more dry as you layer over. I'm just going to keep working for time's sake though, and add a little more white. And now you can just start to layer over what you had at the top and start to add more white. It's a very weak white. Add some more little branches in here. But yeah, you're going to start to see some branches coming up from the center parts. Coming out to the side a little bit. And as I'm making these branches, I'm putting a little bit more force down to get the paint on there, but then as I'm getting closer to where the branch kind of fades into the shadows, I'm not putting as much force down so that the paint doesn't go on as hard, and it kind of looks like it's fading into the background there. Got some more right here. And at the base, they're just kind of like all over the place, these little lines and branches. And you can start to highlight over a few of the branches that you put on the outer parts there. Okay, and so in general, there's how I would do that tree. I am going to add another little highlight just to show you how it just really builds the depth. So I just mixed white with my permanent green light, and you can add even more highlights on some of these branches, and that's just going to give you that little boost of depth. All right, and there is our Douglas fir type of tree. Next, we're moving on to the Monterey pine, or a cypress type of tree that you see on the West Coast in California. These are some of my favorite trees. And for this one, we could start with the angled brush. So we're going to start with the base, and then we're going to start to work on some of the branches. Why not paint the lone cypress tree, the famous tree in Monterey? So I'm starting with burnt umber and magenta, and it mixed with a little bit of my dark green there. Just a nice dark color. It's mixed a little blue in there too. Okay, and this one is going to have base right here. So these have really crooked, twisted. Just gonna dip that in the water a little bit there. Crooked and twisted trunks. And twist it like that. And this guy, this lone cypress tree, got some damage in the last couple years. So we'll just show a little broken piece there. It's got a big twist here. Goes up there. Over here. And there's a couple little branches. So this angled brush is kind of frayed, and it's giving me more of those little, it's giving me more of those little bristle, broken pieces that are fuzzy looking there. Okay, there's that. So I'm going to put the angled brush back, and we're going to go to the flat tip brush. All right, so for the flat tip brush, now I want to add just a little bit more variation to the trunk. So I'm mixing a little bit of white in with my umber, and we're just gonna follow along here, twisting this highlights around to show that the branches are twisting a bit. And I'm gonna take some black, darken a couple spots in my trunk. Couple branches there. This one's broken. And it's a little thicker at the base there too. Got a couple little dead branches coming off. Okay, and now we're going to take our dark green and ochre. I think that's actually going to be our highlight color, so I'm going to take some black and some dark green and some sap green and some magenta. And that is going to be our shadow color. So we're going to start with the shadows. This tree's got, just taking the flat tip brush, dabbing it dragging it just very slightly. Just going back and forth, leaving a couple little void spots where you can see through just a little bit. And we've got another one right here. Dabbing to get a little bit more of the bristled look, and dragging to get a little bit of those longer extended branches. Very gently pressing there. Okay, so there's the shadowy parts. Now I'm just going to clean this brush off in the water, dab it on my paper towels, and we're going to take that highlight color. I'm going to mix a bit more ochre into there and a little bit of white. And then we're going to layer up a couple little highlights. So it's like the light source is kind of from the left, sun's like up here looking down. And we're just dabbing these really subtle little highlights on there. Take some more white and ochre, a little bit of brown. And just adding these little highlights. These are really dark trees, especially like midday, all the shadows that they create. All right, so there's a very quick, not super detailed version of a cypress, but you can still see how different these trees are. Next, we're going to go to the juniper. And for the juniper tree, we're going to start. This one, again, you don't really see any of the main trunk, but we are going to start by just putting a trunk there, just making some brown and a little bit of blue, just so we can see where that should go. So that's about where your trunk would be. Next, we're going to take our light green, permanent green light, and our ultramarine blue. And we'll do a little bit of our dark green, just to cool that down a bit. And we're going to start with the flat tip brush. You don't want to have too much paint on the brush, so make sure you got that on there. And we're going to just start by making some lines very gently, kind of coming off of that center spot there. And then as we continue, we start to see some more branches breaking away from that central spot. We want to cover up that color that we made for the trunk. Just mixing in a little bit of my darker green. So these branches kind of come up and little bits come off of the sides, also facing up. Take a little bit more of my dark green, bluish color there. So very gently pressing to get these nice lines. Now to the side, very gently. All these little branches come off of that one. And then just kind of rounds out a little bit towards the base. Make sure you cover up the spots around the trunk. So I mixed my dark green with that other lighter green color we had. Okay, now that we got the base down, we can start to add our highlights. So I'm just going to get the extra paint off of my brush, and I'm going to take my light, permanent green light with my cad yellow and some white. And let's do a little bit of our dark green and some more white. And then we're going to start. Make sure you have the extra paint off your brush. And we're just going to start adding some highlights on these little branches that we had. You want to add some more in the central part here. Kind of just like you have on the outside. You want to do one branch and then have all the little bristles coming off of there. And as I mentioned before, if you want this to layer up really nicely, you might want to wait for the shadow part to dry first. I'm just working into it right now just to give you the quick tutorial. And I also want to mention that there are a lot of different ways that you can paint these pine trees, and there are many more species of pine trees that I did not even touch on in this tutorial, but you are welcome to paint these however you'd like for whatever you're learning to paint a pine tree for. This just happens to be my particular style of painting, using this layering method where I start with the darker layers and build up a little bit more highlight. So let's grab some more white there. That about does it for us there. So we have a lodgepole pine, a Douglas fir, Monterey pine, and a juniper tree. You may have noticed that I have this section empty still. I am going to make a part 2 of this video where I create a close-up of each of these pine trees. So I will be doing a close-up including some pine cones and some of the close-ups of the needles and the branches, and those will be going down here. So make sure you stay tuned for part 2 when that's available. That's going to be in the description under this video. All right guys, that concludes part 1 of painting different types of pine trees using acrylic paint. Hopefully you enjoyed this one more than the one I created a few years ago. I know I've grown as an artist, and I've also grown as a content creator, so hopefully you could see the improvements in the quality of what I was giving you guys today. So thanks for watching. If you have any recommendations for future painting tutorials, leave a comment below and I can add that to my list of tutorials to create. Make sure you come back next week and check out part 2 where we focus on more of the details. Hit the subscribe button if you liked what you saw. I have more painting tutorials coming out all the time, and I look forward to sharing more of my artistic journey with you guys. So thanks for joining today. Have a wonderful day and happy painting. Bye.